Shakespeare! Welcome to What's Shak'n with Shakespeare, Act 1, Scene 2, a brief but tedious podcast from Full Circle Players. Full Circle Players is a theater company based in Riverside, California. Greetings all, I'm your Mister of Ceremonies, Rob Foley. In this podcast, I take a lighter, less scholarly look at the bard, his work, his world, and his legacy. I focus on things I love about Shakespeare, the insults, major life events related to Will, the famous actors who have made their mark in the world of Shakespeare, both good and bad, and of course I'll rant a little about things that at the end of the day aren't really that important. Before we get started, I wanted to apologize. I had mentioned that I would be doing an interview this week. Well, that didn't happen. And I'm not sure when it's going to happen, so please forgive me. When I get that interview done, I will put it up in one of my episodes. So I've divided this pod of casts into sections which I'll visit and revisit as we go. So, without further much ado, let's begin with, what was Will drinking?
Drink, sir, is a great provoker of three things: nose painting,
What
sleep,
beverages, alcoholic or
and
no,
urine.
were consumed during Renaissance? Ale we talked about last week. Ale was the most popular drink during Shakespeare's life. It was cheap and readily available. Today, we'll talk about another drink that Shakespeare must have often been drinking, beer. ShakespeareOnline.com states, beer eventually became more popular than ale. In 1574, there were 58 ale brewers to 33 beer brewers in London, but gradually beer replaced ale over the next century as the most popular beverage. So at Shakespeare's time, it would have been ale that was most often consumed. Then slowly beer replaced it. And in case you're wondering, and I was, what is the main difference between ale and beer? Well, the main difference is ale is made with a top fermenting yeast. This next bit comes from bullcranium.blogspot.com, and this talks specifically about the beer of Elizabethan England. And in comparison to today's beer, it was darker in color and not very heavily hopped, and it was rather sweet. A few years before Shakespeare's birth, a London brewer stated that he made 2.5 barrels of beer from 1/4 of malt, whereas today brewers make as many as 10 barrels from that same amount, so it was considerably stronger back then. And this sent me down another rabbit hole. I was thinking about the characters in Shakespeare's plays. Well, which of them are the most associated with drinking beer or ale? Of course, when one thinks of characters who drink, the mind goes to Sir John Falstaff. Falstaff is famous, however, not for his love of beer or ale, but for his love of sack. Falstaff loves sack, which has a very different connotation now than it used to. Sack, love sack, baby love sack. Sorry. Sack is a type of sherry, not beer, and we'll get to Falstaff and his love of sack next week. Now, Bardolph, who is one of the members of Falstaff's crew in Merry Wives and in Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, he certainly seems to have been a beer drinker. I would have thought he would have been. He's described as having a red, bulbous nose, which of course is often associated with too much drinking. But upon further research, Bardolph is talked about as being drunk, but he never actually seems to be drunk, nor does he ever really seem to be drinking. In fact, he's usually getting others a drink, so he may have been more of a servant than an actual participant much of the time. And as far as the red bulbous nose goes, it's far more likely that he had some kind of a skin disease, which caused that disfigurement of his nose and the splotchy marks on his face. So, Bardolph, not a big beer drinker. So, the next time you raise a pint to your lips, Remember what the porter said.
Drink, sir, is a great provoker of three things: nose painting,
Now
sleep,
you take a look back at this week in
and
history
urine.
411 years ago in a segment called According to Shakespeare documented on March 5th, 1610, Gilbert Shakespeare, one of William's younger brothers, signed a deed as a witness because he was a Stratford resident. Now, there's no obvious reason why it was Gilbert and not someone else. The deed relates to the owning of a house which was managed as a tavern by Marjorie Lord, and it was situated in Middle Row. So the property was not Gilbert's, it was not Will's, it was not anyone else's in his family. Apparently he was only there to show that someone else was there to witness it. And I guess this makes sense if you think about how easy it would have been to forge someone's signature in those days, especially when you take into account that people tended to spell their own names several different ways, as we've been seeing as we go along here. So the deed includes Gilbert Shakespeare's signature. Looks like we have another spelling of the name of Shakespeare. This time it comes from Will's brother, Gilbert. And Gilbert spelled his last name Shakespeare, and it was written neatly. And this indicates that Gilbert had been educated probably at the same grammar school where Will went. And it's the only example of Gilbert's handwriting that is currently known of. Shakespeare documented has an actual picture of the deed Gilbert signed. Looking at it, to me at least, it looks like the P was more like a Y, but the ink on the paper is quite faded, and even if it's magnified, it's a little difficult to make out. But if you want to go see it for yourself, you can go to shakespearedocumented.folger.edu, and if you type March 15th, 1610 in the search bar, you should find it immediately. Now, little is known about Gilbert Shakespeare's life. We know he was a haberdasher in London in the 1590s. He returned to Stratford sometime around 1602 in time to act in Will's absence as his Season, Seisin. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Which is someone who represents the property owner when that property owner is absent. And Will had purchased 107 acres from John Combe in May of 1602, and Gilbert was believed to have lived in Stratford from at least 1602 until his death in February of 1612. This has been my next segment was inspired by my wife's coffee mug.
What hath it done?
Roast meat
Today's insult comes from the play The Merry Wives of Windsor. It probably wouldn't be in anybody's top 10 of favorite Shakespeare plays, but it is one of his comedies that rarely disappoints. And Merry Wives holds a special place in my heart. It's one of the 3 Shakespeare plays that I've directed. And it was such a fun show to direct and to act in. And it's the closest thing to a sitcom that Shakespeare ever wrote. Now, John Falstaff is pretty much the main character, the main antagonist for sure. Now, he was plucked from the history plays Henry IV, Parts 1 and 2, and, well, he doesn't have an appearance in Henry V, but he's talked about in Henry V. Anyway, John Falstaff was basically taken from the Henry IV era and dropped into Shakespeare's present day in a comedy. So that makes Falstaff and everyone in his posse roughly 210 to 240 years old. Maybe they're vampires. Oh, I just got a great / terrible idea. The Merry Slayers of Windsor! Yeah, maybe that's just a terrible / terrible idea. Oh boy. Yeah, Moving on. The play should fit in somewhere between the events of Henry IV, Parts 1 and 2. It certainly occurs before Falstaff's death in Henry V, which would have been around or just before 1415. Supposedly, Queen Elizabeth wrote to Shakespeare and requested him to write a play about Falstaff falling in love. However, several different sources I found have refuted this story. It is not believed to be true, or at the very least, there is no factual evidence to back up this story. On closer inspection, if Queen Elizabeth had requested Will to write a Falstaff falling in love story, she may have been quite upset, because Shakespeare did nothing of the kind, and I just can't imagine that Shakespeare would ignore the Queen's request had she made it. Falstaff does not fall in love. He actually is trying to seduce two women, and Shakespeare was well known for not including specific commentary, social commentary, political commentary in his plays, whereas someone like a contemporary like Ben Jonson, for example, included them all the time. In fact, he was often in legal trouble. So Shakespeare usually went out of his way not to ruffle any feathers, and I just can't imagine that Shakespeare would have ignored the Queen's request. In Merry Wives, Falstaff is trying to seduce and then grift two middle-class women, who are, of course, the Merry Wives, Mistress Ford and Mistress Page. Now, he fails on both counts, and because of his actions, he's abused and tormented on 3 separate occasions. So the two women, Mistress Ford and Mistress Page, receive identical love letters from Falstaff. And the first thing they do is they share the letters with each other. They quickly realize that they've both been written the same letter. In fact, one comments that it just looks as if Falstaff has substituted the names, as if he just has these letters of love ready to go at a moment's notice, and he just leaves the to whom it is blank. Anyway, they share the letters with each other, and then the Merry Wives decide that they are going to torture the fat knight. The Merry Wives set up a false romantic liaison, naughty, naughty, between Mistress Ford and Falstaff. Now, Master Ford finds out about this. He's gone in disguise himself and is actually financially supporting Falstaff in order to get information from him. And so Master Ford finds out that Falstaff intends to sleep with Mistress Ford, his wife. Of course, he tries to catch Falstaff sleeping with her, and he almost does. But the wives think quickly, and Falstaff is inside Mistress Ford's house, and they basically put him in a giant laundry basket or a buck basket, and servants walk the giant buck basket out right under Master Ford's nose. Falstaff is taken down to the river, and then he's dumped in it. And Falstaff gets caught up in the linens and other things, and he nearly drowns, but he escapes and pretty much spends all night lying on the shore until he finally has enough strength to get up and walk back to the inn. And there in Act 3, Scene 5, he describes what it was like to be stuck in a basket full of soiled Elizabethan undergarments. He describes it as the rankest compound of villainous smell that ever offended nostril. I love that line. So much imagery. And if you can work that into a comment about someone or something, you really should. Although I guess I hope you'll never be in a situation where this occurs. But anyway, here's the line again. The rankest compound of villainous smell that ever offended nostril. That was
Roast meat
the
phalanx
Now, if you're like me, you may have asked yourself, what is the weather like in Stratford-upon-Avon right now? Wonder no more. It's time for our up-to-the-minute Stratford-upon-Avon. And the weather is cloudy, 52 degrees, with a high of 52 and a low of 45 degrees. Cold indeed, and labor lost, then farewell heat and welcome frost. That is from The Merchant of Venice, and this has been in this segment plays. It's a segment called Spear carriers are actors
Keep thy
with few
spear upright.
lines. They stand in the background, oftentimes still as a statue, for minutes at a time. Usually the only reason that a spear carrier is there is to either pad the number of characters on stage, or to give one useful piece of information, or to agree with someone else's comment, or in this case, to be tormented by the person who is giving exposition for the beginning of the play. So today's spear carrier is First Commoner from Julius Caesar. He is a carpenter by trade who has the unusual distinction of being just the second person to speak in Julius Caesar. Rarely does a spear carrier get to be one of the first people to talk in a show. He has one line and one purpose, which is to establish that the common folk are celebrating Caesar's return as a holiday, which draws derision from Flavius, who clearly does not approve of this makeshift holiday. First Commoner spends mere seconds on stage, then he exits with other commoners a few lines later. Since he enters at the start of the play, well, very little setup is needed. Act 1, Scene 1, Rome, a street. Enter Flavius, Marellus, and certain commoners. Flavius: Hence! Home, you idle creatures, get you home. Is this a holiday? What? Know you not, being mechanical, you ought not walk upon a laboring day without the sign of your profession? Speak, what trade art thou? First Commoner says. Why, sir, a carpenter. You tell him, First Carpenter. And that has been What would this podcast be without a good old-fashioned rant about things that have little to no importance?
Sorry.
Thus begins my rant.
Speak the speech trippingly.
Previous rants have been about words that are often pronounced incorrectly, but today's rant is about Ophelia and how a director can help the audience understand Ophelia's situation a little more clearly by doing one simple thing. Now, Ophelia is a young woman from the play Hamlet. She is the daughter of Polonius, a high-ranking official and advisor to the King of Denmark. This means she is a noblewoman, and a fairly powerful noblewoman at that. Now, Ophelia is also the friend slash girlfriend slash lover of Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark. You may have heard of him. Later in Act 4, Scene 5, Ophelia enters singing to herself, and everyone thinks that she has lost her mind. But I would argue that she is not singing to herself, she is singing to her unborn child, because Ophelia is pregnant. It's clear from a couple of things. One, it's in her dialogue that she has been with Hamlet, who has gone for somewhere between 6 to 9 months. Everything she sings about is about how a man has taken advantage of a woman and how men impregnate women with no consequence to themselves. So Ophelia says, Alack and fie for shame! Young men will do it if they come to it. By cock, they are to blame. Quoth she, Before you tumbled me, you promised me to wed. So would I done by yonder sun, and thou hadst not come to my bed. So she sings this to her unborn child, and she sings several other things in the scene that are similar to what she said previously. And the flowers that she pretends to give others, well, she may actually have real flowers depending on how the scene is staged, or they might be weeds, or they might be bones, as they sometimes are, or they may just be nothing. She may just be giving air to people. But each one of the flowers that she mentions was a country remedy for causing miscarriage. So everything she's singing about is how unfaithful men are, and everything she's giving out is related to ending pregnancy. So this is why I argue that she is currently between 6 to 9 months pregnant. So if this is my rationale for her being pregnant, and here's the point of my rant, if she's pregnant, then show it. This is the thing I wish productions would include. I've spoken with directors that, oh yes, well, we'll allude to the fact that she's pregnant. Well, alluding doesn't carry the same weight as a baby bump, both figuratively and literally. I've seen Hamlet produced numerous times on stage and film. I have been in it twice, and in only one production that I've ever seen, which was at the Old Globe in San Diego, did they actually have Ophelia showing. The audience gasped when they saw her. She made her entrance and slowly came down the stairs, and you could clearly tell she was pregnant. And everyone in the audience already, it took that one little visual cue and they got it. They understood exactly where she was. We already knew she was without her father. We know that Hamlet has been sent away to England. And on top of this, she is pregnant. She's pregnant without a husband or even a fiancé. And this is, of course, a society where she is not allowed to be unwed and pregnant. She is terrified. She is grieving. She is desperate. And she has almost no options. She could possibly hope that Hamlet returns, but who knows if or when that will be. And her brother is gone, and she does not know that he is actually on his way back. I would also argue that she is not crazy or mad as she's described. So when Laertes finally does come home, she speaks to him. He comments that she's mad, but then he doesn't really make any effort to comfort her or to help her or to take care of her. And he was the last person on earth that she had, and he doesn't help her. I don't think she's mad, unfortunately for her. She is all too sane, and she is without options, and she has been cast out of proper society, and she's been called mad in addition. And I think people often just fail to understand how terrible judgment can be. Rejection and disapproval can be more harmful than any physical blow. I mean, we'd like to think that sticks and stones will break our bones, but words will never hurt us. But words can hurt, and they often hurt much more and for much longer. And anyone who's had someone criticize them for a post on social media knows this. Sometimes the post might not even be directly negative. It might be just hinting at something. But it's hard to let any comment go. So if you can just imagine an entire society hating on her or ignoring her or giving her side glances and little shakes of the head. And I mean, so don't tell me Ophelia is mad. She is telling Claudius in every way except directly that Hamlet has gotten her pregnant. But of course, Claudius has more important things to worry about, and so does Hamlet. No one will do right by her, not even her own brother Laertes. Well, he tries to do right by her, but that is until after she's dead. So for the love of Shakespeare, if you are directing Hamlet sometime in the hopefully not too distant future, make Ophelia clearly pregnant. It goes such a long way to helping the audience understand all that she's going through. And it makes you hate Claudius all the more when he says that she's just crazy. Thus endeth my rant.
Speak the speech trippingly! Not tripping, trippingly.
And with that, I'll exit, hopefully not pursued by a bear. Thanks for joining me for What's Shakin' with Shakespeare. I'm Rob Foley, and this week's fond farewell comes from Coriolanus, Act 4, Scene 1. Coriolanus has been banished from Rome the scene before, and this he says to his family right before he leaves. He says, "Come, my sweet wife, my dearest mother, and my friends of noble touch. When I am forth, bid me farewell, and smile." And scene.
Shakespeare! Shakespeare!